Welcome again to our Introduction to Austrian Economics. In this session, we're going to be discussing Everything Takes Time, Savings, Investment, and Prosperity. The Austrian economists have always emphasized the presence and the importance of the element of time. As I pointed out in an earlier discussion, time surrounds everything that we do, whether it be boiling an egg or building a skyscraper. We cannot escape the element of time. We have to act in time. We have to decide between things sooner or later in time. Time envelops the social and economic activities of all of us and our interactions. This is particularly true with the problems and issues of savings, investment, and capital formation. And this has been a central part of much of the Austrian contribution since the beginning of its founder's writings, Carl Menger, in 1871. In his Principles of Economics book, Menger emphasized that one can distinguish the types of goods in terms of their order or position or relationship relative to the final consumer user. He called first-order goods what we today would call consumer goods, things we buy in the store and which are basically ready for consumption and use. But we don't have the consumer good in virtually all circumstances unless we have first manufactured it. And Menger emphasized that this requires a certain arrangement and ordering of less immediate goods, the use of which enables us to make the final finished good. Think of buying a loaf of bread in the bakery. To have that baked loaf of bread, we need an oven. We need the dough and the other yeast ingredients. And that would be the order of goods just above, let us say, the final consumer stage. But to have an oven, and to also have the yeast and the flour, we also need to have other related goods to have those goods. The oven has to be made out of iron and other material. The wheat has to be grown. The yeast has to be prepared. And then going further up the chains, backwards from the consumer stage, those would be even higher and higher orders of production. What Menger was emphasizing in this was a number of things. All production is related and interconnected in causal relationships. And while we look down on the one hand that we need to dig the iron out of the ground, the iron has to be transformed into a useful baking machine. We have to combine it with the flour and the yeast and the wheat to make the loaf of bread, and then it comes to the store. The value relationship goes the other way. Why would we invest in an oven? Why would we bother to grow the wheat or have the yeast or any of these higher order goods, as Menger expressed it, if it wasn't the fact that we have a demand and a desire for bread and we cannot satisfy it unless we combined in certain complementary and interconnected ways through time, going backwards up the production chain to be able to begin production long in the past to have the loaf of bread today. Just as things have to be done today, the planting of the wheat, the digging of the iron ore out of the ground, so that looking to a future time, we can use those and combine them so that we can have that loaf of bread on some tomorrow ahead of us. This was particularly taken up by his inspired student, that is Eugen von Bombawerk. As I mentioned in the introductory lecture, Bombawerk and his brother-in-law, Friedrich von Mises, had discovered Menger's work as graduate students, inspired by it, wanted to take it up and develop it further. And the one element, or a central element that Bombawerk took, was this idea of the capital structure of the production processes through these orders of stages of manufacturing and preparation. And he then wrote a lengthy work that appeared in several volumes. The full set is known as Capital and Interest. What Bombawerk said is that what man begins with are two core forms of production ingredients, raw materials and labor. And we can combine the raw materials and labor to make things that we want, but in a very primitive way. We are more likely to be successful in this if we first devote some of our labor and some of the resources that may be at our disposal to produce and manufacture what are called capital goods, that is, produce means of production, to invest time and resources in making the machines, to manufacturing the tools and implements with which we will be able to make more and better goods in greater output and in better qualities. Now, if one understands this, one understands the entire notion of what the Austrians came to call a time structure of production. And if we want more goods and better goods, over time we must invest in more and more capital. By doing this, we invest in more time, making more sophisticated machines, more productive machines, what the Austrians came to call roundabout methods of production, through this complementary production stage. Now, what is required in this process is to realize that capital not only has to be produced, but maintained. We have to take out of the existing output that the society produces enough of our labor time and available resources to plan to replace the oven that finally wears out, or the automobile that no longer runs, or the roof on the building that will eventually, because of the elements, need to be replaced as well. So capital needs to be replaced as it is worn up. But it is not enough to invest to replace capital. If we want the economy to grow, we must also invest in new capital. Think of it this way. Suppose that you have an oven that enables you to make 10 or 100 loaves of bread, let's say. Now, that machine will eventually wear out. We must be planning to set aside enough labor and resources and other tools that could be used for other things to be ready to be making the replacement oven so that it can be synchronized when the existing oven wears out so that we can replace it in a timely and coordinated fashion so as to see no break in the 100 loaves of bread a day that this initial machine has enabled us to manufacture. But if we want more bread, we need to do one of two things or both. We must devote more of the existing output that our capital stock enables us to produce, to set aside more labor time, more resources, more of other tools to either improve the capital that gets used up. For example, the oven wears out, and we replace it not with a duplicate oven that will enable us to make the same 100 loaves of bread again and again, but to devise ways to make a more productive oven with which it's replaced, a better quality oven, so that when we replace the old one, the new one enables us not to make just 100 loaves of bread a day, but 150. And if on top of that, we have set aside enough savings out of the resources and labor time that we could have been using for other things to not only replace that oven, but to make a second oven, we will then have the ability, when both ovens have been manufactured and are up and running, to, let's say, make 300 loaves of bread. But that means that we have to be setting even more of our output aside to now maintain 2 ovens when they need replacing, rather than 1. So the capital structure becomes increasingly capital intensive, both to keep production flowing and to be able to devote the resources, raw materials, and other types of capital equipment to replace the capital that gets used up. This is the essence of the capitalist investment process. It is the way we societies become richer. Let's take the simplest and most elementary example of, again, Robinson Crusoe alone on his island. He's shipwrecked. He barely has anything that he's been able to salvage from the sinking vessel before it falls below the waves. And now if he wants to do such things as fish in the lagoon, he could wade into the ocean and he could try to catch some fish by hand, but the likelihood of him catching any or even very much is very minimal. He could take some time aside from doing that and instead tear down a sturdy branch off a tree, take off the leaves, sharpen one end of the branch against a rock, and now he will have a form of a spear. And with the spear, he is more likely to be able to catch some fish than trying to catch them with his bare hands. Instead of maybe only one or 2 fish a day, the spear would enable him to maybe, let's say, catch 5 or 6. But he could do better than that. If he, again, takes away time that could be used for other things, and instead now devotes himself to cutting down a tree somehow, hollowing the trunk out, and therefore making himself a canoe, and from sturdier and larger branches, bringing them down and carving out a paddle, and then having made the canoe and the paddle, taking some time and resources to do another thing, to take the vines off the trees and weave them into a net. And now, instead of wading into the lagoon, and with the luck of the fish that may be close to shore, spearing maybe 2, 3, 4, 6 fish a day, he can now paddle out further out to sea, and he can cast the net out into the water. And in the time that it would take him to capture 6 fish with a spear, he may be able to now with his net bring home to shore dozens of them. Both the quantity of fish and the variety of fish that will now be available to him will have increased. But it's not only that he will have had to take time and effort to make these capital goods. The fact is, these things take time. And if he's making the canoe and the paddle by cutting down the tree and hollowing it out and so forth, he has to take time away from pulling berries off the branches, or catching fish with his more primitive tools, or trying to hunt down some wild animals with these primitive tools to be able to have some meat. What he has to do is he has to collect the berries, salt a few of the fish that he's caught with his spear, maybe save some meat that he might have been able to get by successfully downing some animal on the island, not consuming all of his output, but setting some aside to be able to use while he is not doing those immediate productive activities, so as to have the time to carve out the canoe and make the paddles and weave the net. So savings involves 2 things: setting aside time and labor and existing resources, and in one sense, in that primitive circumstances, setting aside real resources, consumption goods that he can live off while he's making the capital, which will then enable him to produce even more output looking down the road. Now, of course, today our society is more complex, but the logic of Böhm-Bawerk's little elementary Robinson Crusoe case is no less true. Today, we don't have to defer consumption in an absolute sense so as to be able to undertake capital. We invest in more capital, and we have greater output. And we just merely siphon off part of the greater output and not consume it immediately, so we have the resources and the material to be living off to maintain that greater capital and then to be adding to the capital again and again and again. That, in a nutshell, in this Böhm-Bawerkian sense, however beginning it is in the analysis, is the essence of savings, investment, and capital formation. There is another element in this that I think is worth taking a few minutes to elaborate on. And that is, if one understands Böhm-Bawerk's analysis, one understands why the Marxian conception that the workers are exploited by the evil businessman is not true. What is the Marxian conception, the socialist conception? The conception that some people in the White House imply when they say such things to businessmen: you really didn't build it. The fact is, businessmen, acting on a free market, do build it. The Marxist has the following admittedly somewhat satirical imagery. The penniless and propertyless worker knocks on the door of the capitalist factory. And a little trap door opens, and the businessman says, "Yes." And the worker says, "Sir, I have no tools. I have no implements to produce anything to support myself and my family. May I come into your factory and use your machines and your tools so I can produce output so I and my children don't starve?" And the businessman says, "Yes, yes, come in. Use my machines in my factory, and you'll be able to make 10 units of output." "Thank you, sir. I will have food on the table for me and my family now. And the greedy businessman says, ah, but it is my factory, and it's my machines. Why, you can't expect to use it for nothing. Out of the 10 units of output you produce each day, is it not fair to have a right to use my capital machines, that I at least keep 3 of the 10 units? Oh, yes, sir. At least that way my children will have something on the table to eat. Thank you, sir. Now, for the socialists, and those who may not know they're socialists, but seem to have been implicitly enveloped by the socialist conception, that is how they view the businessman. It is the worker who does the real work. And it is he who produced the output. And the businessman has nothing to do with this, other than through some historical accident. He has acquired the ownership of the factory and the machines in it, and while doing nothing productive other than sitting up in his office, feet on the desk, and when it was still politically correct, smoking a cigar, the workers on the shop floor, and he's working away the labor of the masses, and then part of it siphoned off as the exploitive, greedy profit of the evil businessman. He didn't build it. Now, is this true? Böhm-Bawerk would tell us no. The question is, how would the worker maintain himself, given that all production takes time? It is true, the businessman may have saved part of his own meager income of the past, and he might have made the machine, and he could have constructed the factory, and now wishing to put the machines to work, he could hire the workers, and he say, but you're going to have to wait along with me till the production process is finished, which may take weeks, months, depending upon the complexity and the nature of the product and the steps involved, years to have a product ready for sale. And it is then that I will pay you the wages that we've agreed upon is your contributory fair share to the complementary production process that we've all participated in making. The problem is not everyone either can or is able to wait for the production process to be completed to receive their portion of the output. Think of the hired hand on the farm. He could wait with the farmer who owns the property until the harvest comes in to receive either some fraction of the harvest or some fraction of the market value when the harvest is sold. But what if he cannot wait? What if he doesn't have the savings to live off until the product is sold to receive his contractual full wage? He then falls upon the person who has had the ability and the discipline and the willingness to save a portion of previously earned income, and not only supporting himself as the owner of the enterprise, but to advance the wages to the workers while the production process is ongoing, so that he and other participants in the production process do not have to wait to receive the wages that they have contracted to receive. They receive it in progress during the production process due to the businessman's own savings or the savings of others he has borrowed with the promise to pay it back with interest to the lender. He therefore has advanced wages to the worker. He has saved them from the need of either living off their own savings or waiting for the product to be finished and sold. Therefore, what Marx confused was profit with implicit interest. What do I mean by that? Anything that is available in the future has a lower value today. The future is discounted against the present. So even if the economy was in a full equilibrium, after all costs have been paid out, even with no equilibrium profits earned by the firm, there would be this little increment of the value of the product over, let us say, the wages and the other expenses paid out. What is that increment? What Böhm-Bawerk tells us is that is the implicit interest that the employer receives for having advanced wages to workers and having foregone the use of a portion of his own savings and income that he could have used in other ways, in either productive or consumption ways, and instead has make those savings available so the worker doesn't have to do the deferring. And that is the implicit interest that the employer receives for advancing the wages to the workers. The same way if someone gives me a loan so I can buy a house or purchase a car or go on a vacation, he expects to be paid a premium, a rate of interest, as a reflection of the fact that he's incurred the time cost of not having a use of his own savings for other purposes while it has been made available to me. Therefore, what Marx confused was the interest of the value of resources and time and money between the present and the future with profit. In the market, if there's balance and equilibrium in the market, there are no profits. Competition competes profits away. But interest is the price of time, and that is the difference between the advanced wages to the workers during the production process and the price of the product that the employer may sell successfully if the consumers want it at the price he had hoped for, which is his premium and reward for having done the waiting during the production process. If you understand this economic element of production and time and the role of savings and deferment, then you realize not only the nature of the capital using and producing process, but you understand the core reason why capitalism does not exploit workers, but in fact capitalism, by generating enough wealth for some at least to have sufficient savings to cover the expenses of the production period, that the worker has the ability to work and earn before a product is ready to be sold and to be paid for. Baumbach considered this, in a sense, the close of Karl Marx's system. This demonstrated that the fundamental assumptions of Marx's economics was flawed. Capitalism doesn't exploit the workers. It gives the workers opportunities and over time greater wealth because of growing capital and output and better and less expensive products than any other system that would be imaginable. The Austrians have often considered this essential to economic analysis. Other Austrians have come after them, such as Baumbach, and refined it, developed it, extended the analysis. But this understanding of the nature of savings, investment, and time is the core of understanding the essential nature of an ongoing and prosperous market system. Thank you, and until next time.